Welcome to the Proctor Podcast Series, presented by the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Founded in 1967, SPOP is one of the largest oral history programs in the country, with nearly 5,000 interviews. SPOP, one community, many voices.
Wuni Ryschkewitsch was born July 24, 1925, in a suburb of Stuttgart, Germany. Her father was a professor at the University of Stuttgart, teaching automotive and aircraft engineering, and was later inducted in the American Automotive Hall of Fame in Detroit. Wuni remembers the election of 1932, in which Hindenburg defeated Hitler in a runoff election. She heard her father tell her mother to vote for Hindenburg in the election because his opponent, Hitler, was too young, too inexperienced, and too unreliable. Hitler ended up in power anyway and proceeded to establish a single-party state in Germany. She remembers being a child during the rise of Hitler's Nazi Party and their attempts to rid Germany of its social democratic and communist parties.
And then there was a big deal about the Reichstag, which was the parliament, being burned down. And we were told in school and everywhere that the communists had burned it down. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the Nazis burned it down and blamed it on the communists in
How
order.
old would you have been when that happened?
7.
When the war began, the Germans were told stories about the Poles and how they attacked innocent Germans at the borders. Later, many realized these were the same stories that were told during World War II about the Belgians, and were just stories made up to convince the German people their government was in the right. Wuni was a member of the Hitler Youth as a child, as all children older than 10 were required to be. After graduating from high school, she spent 9 months sick with appendicitis and was then sent to the Sudetenland to volunteer at a camp, as all other German teens were required to. She got there in February 1945, and by early April, the girls at the camp could hear Russian guns. The leaders left the camp, leaving the 20 teenage girls and their young German group leader alone at the camp, and none of them were permitted to go home.
And we had a meeting, and we said, what do we do now? We can hear the Russians coming.
Sure.
And when the Russians come, we've had it. We're going to get raped all over the place.
Sure.
So we said, will you give each one of us a piece of paper saying that we didn't run away, that we were released, and sign it and put a stamp on it. Uh-huh. And then another girl and I, we were from Stuttgart, and we got a train, and they had bombed the bridge over the Danube.
Yes.
And on foot, we made it across. The bridge was just still sort of hanging there, but you could sort of walk along the girders. We made it over to the other side. We made it to the railroad station, and there were no more trains. And we said, now what do we do? Hitchhike home? How are we going to get home? And a train pulled in, and it was a Red Cross train. And this whole long Red Cross train full of severely wounded German and Hungarian soldiers stopped, and it had one doctor on it and 1 or 2 nurses. And we had our uniforms on. I had given my civilian clothes to a girl who was from Slovenia, which had been annexed by the Germans. And she said, the Russians are already there. If I come home in that uniform, they're going to shoot me, hang me, whatever. So I gave her my civilian clothes, and I said, I'm going back to Germany. I can still
get by with
wear
that.
it. And in that case, that uniform was an advantage.
Yes.
And a doctor came out and he said, do you girls know anything about nursing? And we said, we've had first aid courses coming out of our ears during the war.
Sure.
In fact, I wore a nurse's apron in the air raid shelter and carried a little thingy with Band-Aids in it.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Sure.
And so he said, get on.
She spent some time helping soldiers on the train, though they were provided with very few materials. They took the train to about 2 hours from Stuttgart, and helped unload the train there.
And we went to the Army hospital with these guys, and they gave us a cup of coffee and something to eat. And then we were out in the street, and here came a truck, and I think it had milk cans on it. And we thumped them down, and they said, "Where you girls going?" And I said, "I want to go to Kirchheim, and this one's going to Stuttgart." He said, "Hop on, I'm going to Kirchheim."
Oh.
So this other girl, there was still trains going in Germany.
Uh-huh.
We got her on a train, and I will never remember, I walked down the street, and this way came my mother, 7 months pregnant, and had my little brother on her hand. And here I came, and she just clung to me.
I'll bet.
She said, "Thank God you're home. Thank God you're home."
Oh, yes.
My dad had to leave, my brother, and that's another really nasty story. The SS drafted all these 16-year-olds, and a neighbor in the same small town where we were, her husband had died in the war, and she'd lost her oldest son in the war, and she was hiding this kid, and he caught him and he hung him. And my parents, this is what my mother told me. She said, "Your dad and I spent a sleepless night trying to think what to do. Should we hide him or should we let him go?" And my dad said, "If he gets killed in the army, it's an act of God.
Yeah.
If he gets caught and hung, it's our fault because we were hiding him." And in a little town, everybody would have known my brother was still there, you know. So they let him go.
Oh.
And he was 16 years old, and they asked him, they said, "Who can ride a motorcycle?" What 16-year-old do you know that doesn't say, "I can ride a motorcycle"? So they made him a messenger.
Uh-huh.
And he got shot off his motorcycle through his back. And it took a chip off his spine, but it did not get...
His central nervous system.
Didn't get his nervous system. And the Americans came, picked him out of the ditch, put him across the hood of a Jeep. And in the next town, they found a small hospital with a doctor, and they dropped him off. And that doctor saved my brother from being
Yes.
Paralyzed for the rest of his life. So, but then they picked him up after he was well again. They picked him up and put him in a prisoner of war camp.
Wunhild got home from Stuttgart while her brother was still away at a POW camp. She caught a ride on the milk truck again to the camp where he was at. When she got there, she discovered that the German officer in charge of the prison had released all of the young soldiers, including her brother, and that he was already on his way home at the time.
We had passes, and you could not go with more than 15 kilometers from where you lived. You had to have a permit. And we got stopped by an American patrol, and he looked at my papers, and he said, "Where's Kirchheim?" I said, "Oh, 10 kilometers down the road." He looked at me and he said in broad dialect German, "Now you're lying, girl. I know where Kirchheim is. My parents are German. I'm from Stuttgart." And I thought, oh my God, he's going to put me in jail. So he said, "I tell you what, don't do it again. I'll let you go this time, but don't do it again."
Wunhild Ryschkewitsch had a very exciting life filled with unique experiences that did not end when the war ended. She married her husband George while they were in college in Ohio and had a baby a year later. They became American citizens in 1955 and moved to Gainesville later, where she's been ever since.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Proctor Podcast series. For more information about our program or interviews, please visit our website at www.history.ufl.edu/ORAL or call us at area code 352-392-7168. That's 352-392-7168. SPOP. One community, many voices.